So if you could all just click continue and we will start. So again, welcome to all today of this OECD Local Development Forum event. The OECD Local Development Forum supports the OECD's Local Economic and Employment Development Program. It's thousands of economic development practitioners, social innovators, and entrepreneurs. We are here today to launch the report Job Creation and Local Economic Development 2020, Rebuilding Better. We have a series of discussions and panels for today. So we're going to start with a presentation of this latest flagship report of our lead program here at the OECD. This presentation will be done by Ms. Lamia Kamal-Shawi. She is the director of the OECD Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. Her portfolio oversees the LEAD program, which focuses on local development, as well as numerous other committees that address issues of regional, urban, rural development, SMEs, and tourism. So without further ado, we will launch the discussion with Ms. Lamia Kamal-Shawi. Thank you, Lamia.
Thank you so much, Karen. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm going to share my screen because I'm going to make a presentation. Here we are. So I'm delighted to welcome you all today for the launch of Job Creation and Local Economic Development 2020. This is a biannual publication of the LEAD Directing Committee, and the edition we are launching today focuses on local economic vulnerabilities and how we can go about rebuilding from the bottom up. So this report obviously comes at an important time. The COVID-19 crisis has unleashed the worst job crisis since the Great Depression. The last OECD Employment Outlook provides that the number of working hours lost to the COVID crisis is 10 times worse than the loss during the few months of the 2008 financial crisis, as shown in the chart on the left side. And the chart to the right shows how different countries fared during the first 3 months of the crisis. And you can see, for instance, Italy registering huge falls by the second month of the crisis before recovering. The job recovery, in any case, is not expected until after 2021. However, as we know, aggregate numbers hide spatial differences, some places having been more directly impacted by the pandemic. COVID-19 has been a crisis focused on particular sectors, the sectors that depend most on human contact and mobility, as well as tradable sectors where interruptions to trade and supply chains have had a big impact. We estimate, thanks to our data, that the share of jobs in the sectors most at risk varies from less than 15% to more than 35% across regions. And we can see that tourism and service-driven urban economies are especially vulnerable. In Europe, for instance, tourist destinations such as islands in Greece and Spain, as well as Algarve region in Portugal, they have 40% or more of job potentially at risk. And in about a quarter of countries, capital regions have the highest share of jobs at risk, even if these regions are likely to be more resilient over the long term. For the places that we expect to be most at risk, we are already seeing an unemployment spike. For example, and this is for this data that you can see here on the screen, they are related to the United States. And we see that this is the case in Hawaii and Nevada, where actually Las Vegas is, two major tourist destinations. But places with larger cities like in the state of New York, California, and Illinois also saw considerable increases. Employment data for the EU and the US are difficult to compare, we have to remind that, as in Europe, for instance, many workers remain on furlough schemes rather than appearing as unemployed. But despite this, we can see similar patterns elsewhere. For example, in France, the Paris region, where I am presently, had the highest rates of participation in short-term work schemes. But there is another side to this story. It's about the jobs that have been protected through remote working. And on average, cities also have higher share of jobs amenable to teleworking and better digital infrastructure. In Europe, for instance, the share of jobs amenable to teleworking in cities is 13 percentage points higher than in rural areas. This means we are also seeing a further deepening of divides in already polarized urban labor markets. And while the high skilled are in many cases continue to work remotely, the lower skilled, the people working in SMEs, in small and medium-sized enterprises, and the self-employed, women and the youth are more dependent on face-to-face service jobs, which have been disseminated by the crisis. The young, we can even talk about this year, graduates, in particular the class of Corona, for instance, they are finding it's especially hard to find employment or work experience presently. So for both people and places, the wounds of this crisis will really take a long time to heal. The last crisis led to long-term scarring effect. We have to remind that after the last crisis, almost half of OECD regions had not recovered to 2008 unemployment levels by 2018. That means 10 years after. And this does not count the people who dropped out of the labor force altogether. I mean, discouraged workers and those with care responsibilities. So reactivating these people may be especially difficult. Already pre-COVID regional gaps in activity rates reach 15 percentage points or more in some countries, and these divides could further deepen. We need to do better, obviously, at protecting people and places this time around. We have also to remember that COVID comes on top of broader labor market transitions. Notably, COVID-19 crisis has accelerated the digital transition and automation. And we can see here that the share of jobs at risk of automation varies from less than 4 to more than 40% across regions. We can see that in the map. Some countries display large regional disparities, and this is the case, for instance, of Greece, where the regional gap is 33 percentage points, and in France, it stands at 20 percentage points. So we will need to accelerate our investment in digital infrastructure and skills to match and support transitions for the places and people facing further job losses. COVID-19 may also accelerate investment in green infrastructure to create jobs during the recovery. We have seen, for instance, that there are many political signals, including in the recovery plans at the national and the EU levels. But we have also to remember that it could also create tensions between the need to protect jobs and the need to transition workers away from carbon-intensive industries. The pandemic could also slow down or reorient other type of transitions. For instance, it could alter the geography of opportunities. Disruption in trade, for instance, could result in shorter supply chains in the future. This will create opportunities, but also challenge for areas dependent on trade, such as port. And before the crisis, employment opportunities were becoming increasingly concentrated in capital regions. Capital regions saw the highest relative share of employment growth in about half of OECD countries with more than one region. And widespread telework may remain a permanent feature of the future. We are talking a lot about that, changing where people live and work. This means that urban planning will have to be adapted to the new reality, including shifting from mobility to accessibility. But obviously, We don't know what will happen, but there will be some changes anyway. So what needs to be done in response? Well, we can think about 3 stages: resist, recovery, rebuilding better. And across these stages, obviously, local and regional partners have a key role to play. As part of the resist phase, for instance, national and subnational governments, they have announced large economic recovery packages, already much larger than in 2008. Since March, countries have spent more than $12 trillion globally. Regional and local governments have played an important role in implementing national schemes, but also in filling gaps in access or coverage. They have helped local firms and entrepreneurs navigate the support available, and they have rediscovered the power of the social economy to support communities during times of the crisis. Social enterprises can reach groups that mainstream providers struggle to access, and this connection and the ability for this organization to show the way forward in health, in care, and in the environment will be all the more important to a stronger, more inclusive recovery. So this publication looks ahead to the next phase, recovery and rebuilding. Looking forward, many countries, regions, and cities are already actively planning for the recovery phase. Of course, I look forward to hearing from Director Kaufmann from the European Commission shortly to hear the plans at the EU level. In the recovery phase, local employment and training system will need to be strengthened to enable places to recover. Public employment services, local training providers, and firms will need to work together locally with a balance of face-to-face and virtual services to maintain access for the most vulnerable or those without digital skills, for instance. We also need to act quickly to support young people, the low-skilled, and women before longer-term disengagement sets in. Some of these groups will require more intensive and tailored services to be prepared for the local jobs created in the recovery. We need to work with social enterprises and provide wrap-up around re-employment services from transportation to mental health services. And finally, specific approaches may be required to support communities specialized in sectors facing prolonged drops in demand to make needed transitions. The tourism sector, for instance, has been hard hit and needs more support for business to survive, to safely restart international tourism and to restore travel confidence and to adapt to a more sustainable and resilient models. We have been doing a lot of work in this area with the tourism committee. In the lead committee, we have been paying attention, for instance, to the sector of culture and creative sectors. We have been looking at the impact of COVID. And we have seen that, for instance, the general support packages needs to be more adapted to the high rates of freelance and hybrid employment common in the sector. So the objective, of course, should not be to rebuild our pre-COVID economies. Rather, we can use this crisis as an opportunity to get our communities on the path to a more inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future, to rebuild better. Everybody's talking about rebuilding better. COVID has opened a window for rethinking local development approaches, which many communities are already seizing. This is an opportunity for local leaders to take bold, courageous decisions. But governments need to think beyond short-term returns in terms of local job creation and make sure there are opportunities for the population hit the hardest to gain skills for the long term. Finally, rebuilding better means supporting firms, people, and places through the accelerated digital transition. Of course, you can find out more about each of these recommendations in the report, as well as local case study examples that are laid out in the report. So I see this report not as an end of our work on this topic, but as a starting point for us as we work and learn together about the local impact and path to recovery. And with that in mind, I really look forward to hearing from our panelists on their view of the crisis and the priorities for local development going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lamia Kamashawi, for that. And just to remind all of those who've been joining over the last few minutes that this report is part of the Local Economic and Employment Development Program. It is a program that seeks to ensure more and better quality jobs for all communities. And this report really highlights this local dimension to the crisis and local impacts that we see in the data, but also how the responses need to capitalize on local action. So we will now turn to our next speaker, Ms. Barbara Kaufmann from the European Commission. She is the Director for Employment and Social Governance within the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. And we look forward to hearing sort of the big picture on all of the European actions that are being taken. So Ms. Kaufmann, we welcome you, and feel free to add your video and audio.
Okay, I'm trying. Finally, my video works, it seems. Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to be part of this meeting, and thanks a lot to the OECD for inviting me. I had some difficulties. I had to click on a lot of symbols of bikes and buses and so on until it was clear that I was not a robot, but I finally managed. Yes, I would like to first of all thank not only for the invitation, but also for the very good report from the OECD on job creation and local economic development. And I think that is really a timely report at the current juncture, because it's clear that we cannot only look at the, let's say, the national level even, but it's also very important that we actually go further down and look at the places at the local level, at the regional level, in terms of what actions are needed, what kind of effects we see. And I think I would say, first of all, in terms of the crisis as one key element, and then of course also in terms of challenges that are also existing in terms of green and digital transitions. At the Commission, there are various services that are looking also at the regional, local level. For instance, of course, our colleagues from DG Regio, who will be producing the 8th cohesion report. There's also a long-term vision for rural area, which is being produced in terms of a strategy for long-term vision, and also in terms of DG Grow, in terms of smart specialization. On our side, to some extent, we are contributing to these reports, and on the other hand, we also do some work ourselves. For instance, when it comes to the social scoreboard, which we have recently again published also in a regional breakdown in joint employment, published last year, because the social pillar, we developed this social scoreboard, and last year we started to say this is also needed at the regional level. So it's something that I wanted to point out to. Also in our flagship report, Employment and Social Developments in Europe 2021, we will look at the regional local effects of the crisis and challenges that are at that level. So I think some many interesting findings in the report, but just let me say a few that caught our eye. The unprecedented pressure that is on the labor markets, including notably the local labor markets, the drastic fall in hours worked, and also the rise in unemployment. I just wanted to add first a few of our figures that come, for instance, from the recently published Commission autumn forecast, where GDP this year will be contracting by roughly on average 7.5%. And what is also quite noteworthy that we have seen a long trend over 6 years, a long positive trend on the labor market. We just had a record employment number of 209 million for EU 27, I have to say, in the fourth quarter, and then this drop in employment by 6 million in the second quarter. So what is noteworthy is, even though by next year we do expect that the unemployment on average will increase by 2 percentage points due to the COVID crisis, for now we have seen only, I would say only, I mean it's bad enough, but only a 1 percentage point increase in the EU, and that is linked to an important extent to all the measures that member states have already been taking. One of them being the short-time working schemes that have been supported throughout the union and have then also mitigated the impact in terms of income and jobs, but have been accompanied by a short reduction in working hours, as you observed it, and it also has allowed companies to retain many of their staff, which of course in other moments are scarce in terms of skills. And at the same time, we've also seen that activity rates have gone down. Now, it's clear that the speed of the recovery when it comes, and also the impact now, is different. This was also already mentioned in the report, also between member states, within member states, and it depends not only on the pandemic and the stringency of the measures, but also on economic structure. So if you indeed are in a tourism sector, or let's say at the coast somewhere, then of course you're more affected than other people in other sectors. I can't go into all the details, but I would also say that in terms of people particularly hit, we are very concerned about the young, for instance. The youth unemployment so far is more than double as fast in terms of increase, and we are already over 17% in terms of youth unemployment in the EU, even though only at 7.7% when it comes to the average unemployment rate. And we fear that due to this and also the disruptions of education and training system, there will be even longer term scarring effects. And okay, I could of course go on and say typical forms of employment, low-wage workers, mobile workers will be hit more. But then let me indeed come to the kind of response. And I would first of all say that even member states indeed have been very active in terms of actions. And to that, I'd like to add some ideas what has been coordinated at the EU level in terms of crisis response. More the economic sphere. We're not going to now some health issues that were also, of course, very important and coordinated, even though generally, I mean, there's less EU competence there. But in particular, already at the start, there was a launching of the general escape clause of the Stability and Growth Pact, which meant the member states do not have to respect the normal rules that the pact implies in terms of fiscal policy. There was also a more flexible application of the state aid, and then also our structural funds. There has been further flexibility introduced so that when needed, programs can be, there can be some reprogramming and some more flexible use of the funds to fight the crisis. Then we've also, I already mentioned the short-time work schemes. Commission put on the table, and it was quickly adopted, a instrument of 100 billion, so-called SURE instrument, which is allowing member states that support short-time work schemes to get loans from the EU level. And of course, this is particularly interesting for those member states that have higher interest rates than the EU. And out of these 100 billion, we are over 90 billion have already been allocated and largely dispersed. And we are now sort of still having 9.3 billion that could still be allocated further upon request from member states. So this is about short-time work schemes, similar schemes, and some health issues related to work. Then even bigger, let's say in terms of amounts, initiative is the recovery plan that came in May and that added on top of the normal medium-term financial framework, also a next generation EU, where the Commission is allowed to borrow on behalf of the EU 750 billion for a recovery instrument. And in particular, the main instrument there is the Recovery and Resilience Facility of 672 billion. This is something which is supposed to facilitate reforms and investments, and is supposed to respond on the one hand to the crisis and help with the recovery, but at the same time also support the green transition and the digital transition. And if you imagine that at least 37% of these funds would have to be dispersed for the green transition, and another at least 20% for digitization of our economies, you see that we are trying to combine, on the one hand, the response to the crisis and finding a quick and inclusive recovery, and at the same time also making sure that we are supporting the transitions. There's still some discussions to what extent also, I mean, the social should have some minimum amount, but it's clear that, of course, many, including ourselves and the EBSCO Council of Employment and Social Ministers, are pushing that employment, social, and skills elements are adequately represented. Here, I think it's also very important that social partners are consulted by national governments. I think this cannot always be taken for granted. In some cases, this works well. In others, it does not work so well. We've also heard from some regional authorities that they feel that they're not sufficiently consulted in the preparation of the recovery and resilience plans that are now ongoing. On the one hand, they are now in the process, member states, of submitting these draft plans, and there's some engagement with the Commission on how they are, put together, and whether there's some things that we think should be added, for instance, in the light of the country-specific recommendations that were issued by the Council in 2019 and 2020. And then the other thing is that in the first quarter of next year, these plans really have to be put on the table in a more formal way, and the Commission will have 2 months to evaluate them before, in the end, the Council will decide whether these plans are the ones that can be used to go forward to commit over time all this money in the next few years. So let me just mention also, I think the point was already made about the importance of mega trends also driving digitization and other job losses on the one hand, but also job gains is of course something that we also look at very closely in our reports. And we think also in this context, besides whatever the crisis means or the transitions mean, is also very important to be aware that there can be also some geography of discontent, and how important it is therefore to always make sure that the transition that we are embarking on is fair. For instance, our Executive Vice President Timmermans has said the transition has to be just, or there will be no transition. We'll have too much opposition. So therefore, we have also a just transition mechanism worth 100 billion that I have not yet mentioned, which was put in place shortly after the Green Deal was launched last December, and it is aiming to make sure that nobody's left behind, and it also will especially assist those most affected regions in alleviating socioeconomic impacts that can be expected from the transition. And here also reskilling opportunities are of primary importance. So then let me just also say that the OECD report talked about the importance of local employment and training systems. And let me also say, in this recovery and resilience facility that I already mentioned, one the key elements is the reskilling and upskilling. There's a so-called flagship that we put in the annual Sustainable Growth Survey of September to say, yes, reskilling, upskilling is key. And that's, of course, also in line of the European Skills Agenda of 1st of July in the Pact for Skills, because it is clear that we will need to encourage relevant stakeholders, and I mean, you are also part of that, to undertake concrete actions for upskilling and reskilling of people. And I think this is both an issue of competitiveness, but very much also an issue about jobs and about future social conditions even. So I have, of course, coming from DG Employment, I have to also mention, of course, that besides the Recovery and Resilience Facility, there is the European Social Fund. It's over 90 billion that will be also put on the table in the next financial period. And it also aims to address fair transitions, targets vulnerable populations, including rural community. There are many examples. For instance, the 22 million ESF program in Spain, where they aim to support companies, environmental companies, and to help workers acquire green skills. And I think there are many, many examples like that that are very much needed. So I want to come to the end, of course, and I just wanted to still say a word about our upcoming action plan on the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights, because many of the things that I've been talking about skills, about labor market inclusion, and even something I haven't mentioned yet, maybe social protection, which is also so important in this context, will also be further brought further in the context of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And here the Commission launched in January a broad consultation which will be running until the end of November. So you still have a chance to reply, a few days left, which talks about the new action plan that we will put forward in February, but also collects ideas from stakeholders, anybody interested, and eventually we will have a social summit in Porto. But basically the idea is to have here a social compass for recovery, and basically look into how we can further come to upward social convergence. And I think this is more important than ever now that we are in this crisis. And there are elements like right to fair wages, right to healthcare, lifelong learning, and so on. One of the elements that we've just recently come up with as a proposal is, for instance, the European initiative for minimum wage that was adopted on the 28th of October. So I think I stop there. You see that we are extremely busy. And I think we all need to work together in order to make sure that we get to a sustainable and fair, inclusive recovery. And I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kaufmann, for your intervention and for giving that broad overview of all of the different instruments at the European level, and also for accenting some of the key items that are in this report, because it's true that these scarring effects for those disproportionately affected, a lot of local action will be needed to reach out to these harder to serve groups, and also that a lot of these averages across the EU, when you kind of zoom in and see how the differential effects in different types of communities. And of course, as these short time work schemes start to phase out and numbers might go up, we'll see also communities needing to act on a number of fronts to adjust their systems. So thank you again for those remarks, which are very helpful for this broad range of participants, some of whom are coming from ESF managing agencies or who are implementing these programs on the ground within Europe and even beyond, because we're sort of OECD wide in this session. So thank you again. Now we were going to pass on to our panel. So I'll ask all of our panelists to show their video so everyone can meet you all. So I'll first introduce the panel and then we'll get to some questions. So first I want to introduce Jeff Finkel. Jeff is president and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. Jeff is based in DC, but he has a membership of thousands of different institutions, all focusing on economic development. And we look forward to hearing from you. We also have with us Dennis Leamy. Dennis is the chief executive of the Cork Education and Training Board. He also has a second hat, which is as chair of the Local Economic and Employment Development Correcting Committee, which is the committee at the OECD that focuses on these local issues associated with employment, skills, the social economy, culture, and a lot of other areas that are addressed in this report. We also have joining us Raquel Gil, who is here from Barcelona. And I just want to say she's here joining us with several different hats today. First, as the Commissioner for Employment and Policies Against Precariousness within the Barcelona City Council. She also has a hat as chair of the Eurocities Employment Working Group. And she is the Deputy for International Cooperation of the Cité des Métiers. So pleased to have you here. We also have with us Ben Butters. Ben is the CEO of Eurochambers, which is the eyes, ears, and voice of chambers and business at the European level, ranging from supranational to local chambers of commerce, and many of the firms being SMEs. And I understand you've had a lot of surveys and things to try and keep track of what's going on with business right now. And finally, we'd like to welcome Tor Hatleval. Tor is coming in here from Sweden. He's a labor market economist with the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions. So thank you all for joining us here today for this panel. And just as a reminder to the audience, so we're going to do one round of questions to all of our panelists, and then we'll start jumping in with questions on the programs and the perspectives that they have coming from a wide range of institutions, from training to business to local service provision and employment. So maybe Jeff, we'll start with you. In terms of what are you seeing from the economic development community, the challenges, how you're dealing with them, and the sort of priorities for the future. So all of that in 4 minutes, a tough task, but I'm sure you're up for it. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Karen. It is a particularly difficult time. As many of you know, the statistics, particularly here in the States, are dire. We lead the world, unfortunately, I think, in deaths from this coronavirus. We are probably going to have to figure out how we're going to manage our current Thanksgiving holiday that is coming up over the next few days. And we would anticipate, as I think we've learned across the globe, that holidays tend to bring a disproportionate share of new infections. I think what we're starting to realize is that for us to get back to what it will become a new normal will be a vaccine, and thank goodness that we're seeing a lot of progress on that across the world. The issues that economic developers that I am dealing with, talking to, are several. One, how do we retrain certain classes of people, particularly in the hospitality, tourism area, where those people's jobs are not guaranteed and for some period of time, probably here in the States at least until April, May, if the rollout of the vaccines go the way we expect it to be. But at the same time, that is a real opportunity for many businesses in the States, because prior to the pandemic, we were having real skill set shortfalls. And so if we can move people from that particular industry into some of the sectors that have not been as successful at recruiting staff, we can maybe strengthen our workforce and solve some other issues. Second issue that we're going to have to be thinking about is we've turned into a virtual economy in many ways throughout the States. I get into my office about once every 10 days. People across the country are oftentimes working from home. There are certain industries where that is not possible, but the question will become what happens to our office space in our major urban centers across the country, and are we going to end up hollowing out many of our cities? Third issue is what has happened with small businesses and entrepreneurship during this pandemic. I pulled some statistics for a speech a few weeks ago. We have a significant small business failure rate at this point, 17% of white-owned businesses. We do a fair amount of demographics based on race here in the States. 41% of Black-owned businesses are either out of business or expected to go out of business. 32% of Latino businesses, 26% of Asian businesses, 36% of immigrant-owned businesses. That begs the question, particularly, and most of my members are in the US, even though we are international, what will our Congress do in terms of another round of relief? So far, we have spent about $2.5 trillion, if I remember correctly, $2.3 trillion. And there is another round of support needed for both businesses, state and local government. Our universities and secondary schools are struggling big time because many students can't go to schools because of the outbreaks, and their economic feasibility and foundations are hurting as well. So I don't want to take too much time in this first round of questions, but those would be some of the big issues that we're focused on. And I look forward to listening to the other speakers. Dennis, if you can give my friend Pat O'Shea my regards. I understand that he's retiring early, but please give him my best. And thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And you've raised a number of really important issues for the discussion. First, this link about health and economic development, which maybe was a link that was underdeveloped in the past and has now really come to the fore. This issue of transitions, managing those, because as was mentioned also in the introductory presentation and the remarks by the Commission, this COVID came on top of a lot of structural change that was already underway. A lot of communities are getting a double or triple whammy associated with this. How to rethink some of the urban spaces that you mentioned, which is going to be a big issue. And our center here at the OECD is looking into these considerations for urban planning and development. And some rather startling statistics about inclusion, in particular for those minority-owned businesses. And I just flag for all of those here with us today that our series on missing entrepreneurs will come out next year, but I'm sure we'll be tracking quite a bit the impacts of this on disproportionately certain groups within our countries and regions. So next, I'd like to call on Dennis Leamy. Dennis, he manages the Cork Education and Training Board, and in addition to serving as our lead chair. And he's going to give us the perspective really from a group that's in the trenches delivering these services directly. So Dennis, thank you for joining us and giving us your thoughts on the kinds of things that you've been dealing with and how the world has changed for you.
Okay, thanks very much, Karen. And indeed, Jeff, I'll pass on your best to Pat, who's retiring at this Christmas. Just in terms of this whole subject and topic, I suppose in the report, what struck me was the recommendation about strengthening local employment and training systems to manage the additional pressures, and also then to prevent entrenched disadvantage for young people, the low skilled, and women who have been identified as being the categories of people that will lose out most or have lost out most from the COVID piece. I'm just going to talk a bit about from the Irish perspective. As been said already, like in most countries, a lot of supports have been put in place to ensure that people are kept stable and able to transition to the future, and all of that has been in place and will be in place for the next couple of months. So what's critical now is how we transform our services in delivering to people when we emerge through the COVID crisis. And what's key to that is, and I think Ms. Coughlin referred to it as well, in terms of the reskilling, upskilling, transitioning that needs to happen at a local and a regional level. So if we could give an example of, in Ireland, a lot of these services are managed through education and training boards, which are set up at a regional basis in 16 different regions, and we would work to a national framework through SOLAS, which is the state's agency for further education and the training sector. And part of that would be around a program called Skills to Compete, and indeed it's part funded by the European Social Fund, and would be looking at a package of targeted and modularized education and training aimed at supporting re-entry into the workforce, or looking at how people will transition into new jobs. Ms. Coughlin also referred to the green economy, where there's a need in terms of the healthcare sector, and with in terms of the sectors that will require skilled workers, and also in terms of supporting changes and transitioning that's happening within the sectors that have been most affected by this, through the tourism sector, the hospitality sector, the culture sector. And it's about working closely with employers in terms of this. And I think people need short-term transition pieces that I don't think we're in a position where people expect to be engaged in long-term training. It's about using the skills that they have and transitioning that into the post-COVID world. Also, I suppose what we rely on in Ireland through our systems is a strong community education focus. We have a strong history of community education, what's referred to as well earlier on around lifelong learning and supporting that. And so we have a strong infrastructure set up in that in terms of supporting people at different levels. So be it at level 2, level 3 in a qualification scale, then supporting them through the further education sector into higher education sector, and supporting them wherever they're at to move on that scale. But the sectors that I suppose are most effective are people that have experienced education disadvantage, or that are people who have different issues that might be barriers to addressing their needs. And with that in mind, the Department of Further Education and Training in Ireland has developed a lot of supports in relation to supporting those people to engage with further education, with higher education, with different levels of community education that are there, by allocating additional funding to this. So it could be looking at things like ICT, digital literacy, and supporting communities to engage with that, so that they can engage with the skills training and in developing the response, and also be making people ready to engage in that. But also with that, it's critical and very important that that we work very closely with employers, especially, and that's the joy, I suppose, of working at a local and regional level. There are different responses that are needed or required at a local and regional level, and we work closely with employers to identify what the needs are, so that we can build the training processes to respond to that. So look, Karen, I leave it there for the moment, and we'll move on to other speakers. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Dennis, and really highlighting also where this articulation has to take place between firms, training providers, and the community to really think about this system and how it works at a local level. And I think in the next round, we'll maybe talk a little bit about some of the changes you've had to make, and maybe that you hadn't thought of before a year ago when when you were working, when you started on that. I think we'll turn now to Raquel Gil. Raquel is joining us from Barcelona, and we'd all like to take our weekend city breaks and go visit the city center, but unfortunately it's not the time. And Raquel, I think you're going to tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and how you're addressing this and some of the concerns you have in Barcelona. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to hearing your intervention.
Thank you, Karen, for inviting us to participate in this launch event. And of course, as you were explaining before, we are one of the cities that can be used as an example of what happens in a city that has where the economy of the visitor has a big impact, and how are we dealing with it. Just to share with you some numbers, we have more than 90% unemployed people right now. That means our unemployment rates had increased more than 33%, more between men than among women, but they are quite close. And we are having more impact in some sectors, the less educated people, the young people between 25 and 35 years. There is also a gender gap in all these numbers, agenda reality. And we have a lot of economic sectors who are destroying employment. As I said before, everything that has to do with the visitors economy, the tourism, but also the business we had in the city. We have some fairs and some economy that has to do a lot with business travels, that it's a stop already now. Also everything that has relation with services, especially with services to business and companies that have changed their way of working during this period, as you have explained before. The culture sector has been taking a lot of the problems with this pandemic crisis, and some industrialization as well. The industry is supporting better the crisis, but they are having also some problems there, and that gets even worse because we already had some structural problems in our labor market, and these are the ones that are being hit faster. That would be the young people, the women, the migrants, and the people with temporary contracts as well. But we have some sectors that are providing new jobs, even within this pandemic crisis: public sector, health, social services, and digital and technology. And we are happy about it because 1 year ago we were making public our Green Deal for Barcelona as a plan, as a path that we wanted to work as a city, and these sectors are supporting better, and the ones that are creating jobs even with the situation we have, as some of the sectors that we were already pointing. That means we were already in the right direction, only that we have to accelerate everything that we had on the agenda for the following years. That is based on three basic parameters. We have to improve competitiveness, sustainability, and equality. Someone previously said that if it's not fair, it's not going to be a transition. We think the same. And we have as an objective in the short how we shift the balance between the different sectors within the city, pointing to these that are creating jobs, but there are also the sectors we want to make strong in the future. That would be the green economy, the health economy, the technology, and also the blue economy around our port and the sea we have in the city. So we have started making some measures as a city to protect the jobs that we already have and to foster the high quality employment. That will be our main goal, one of our main goals in these recovery aspects. And for doing that, we are making some, in the first time, some aids and help to the business and the people who already has employers, trying to be complementary to the ones we receive from the state of Spain and even the Catalonian government that has also some measures going on. We have started by making some hiring subsidies to organizations and to companies, and also reinforcing the public hiring and training programs that we already had. And we are trying to improve all the training and reskilling programs that we have, and that can help us to make the transition of the workers from these sectors that have been hit harder to the sectors that we think can help us to go to the future. We also think that it's very important to have a plan for the youth employment. As I said before, we are seeing in all the numbers that the young people are the ones having more problems, and in some cases they are the ones having or suffering a second crisis in their earliest years in the labor market. So we think that's something we have to work on really hard, and also trying to make some holistic sectorial projects that help us to have the local employment services working hand to hand to these sectors that we want to improve for the next years. I will stop it here, and if you have more questions, I will be delighted to answer them later.
Thank you so much, Raquel. And I'm sure people in the audience will have lots of questions, and in particular, the interesting about the transition and what the city is doing to think about its industrial structure and how to make that transition, but also how to link different actors to that, employment services, and also how to ensure that that those who are most at risk are getting served in this difficult time. So we're going to move on now to the next speaker. So Ben Butters, we're looking to hear the the voice of the chambers around Europe and what you're seeing and what we need to do going forward. Ben?
Thank you, Karen. Pleasure to be here, and thanks to the OECD for inviting me. And congratulations to Lamia and the team for the report, which makes very interesting reading. In fact, this is the second week in a row that Lamia and I have shared a platform. We were both involved in a session last week as part of the SME Assembly, the European SME Assembly, and touching upon some of these issues there as well. So it's very, very timely and topical, of course. I wanted, Karen, to tell you briefly about our recent Eurochambers Economic Survey. This is an exercise we've done for 28 years in a row now. The last edition was presented a couple of weeks ago based on feedback from nearly 60,000 businesses across 29 countries. So it's a big piece of statistical work. 90% of the respondents are small or medium-sized enterprises. And we asked them a series of questions really just to gauge their sentiments, their mood for the year ahead, based on investment expectations, domestic sales expectations, export expectations, and most topically for today, employment expectations. And if I may, I'm just going to try and share a slide with everybody. And this will show you the expectations for employment among the respondents for next year. I hope that's working. Over on the right-hand side, so this is a trend since 2008, and over on the right-hand side, you can see the forecast for 2021 that we saw in our latest set of results. As you can see, there was already a really significant drop for the previous edition, but that drop continues for 2021. So, and goes in fact below zero, which corroborates the data that Barbara Kaufmann mentioned a little while ago, that there will be more unemployment in 2021, so further unemployment. Of course, this is regrettable, but not hugely surprising given the current situation. Linked to that, we also ask businesses in that survey what they expect to be the main challenges for the year ahead. And as you can see from this slide, the top challenge is labour costs, which surprised us. In fact, it's typically not the number one, but this year there is a concern among businesses that labour costs will create them considerable difficulties in the year ahead, more so than dealing with the burden of debt that they have accrued in recent months, and more so than financing conditions. So we found that data quite striking. Another perennial high performer in that list of challenges is a lack of skilled workers. And as you can see, it features fairly high again next year. So the skills mismatch, the skills gap is still an issue for businesses in Europe next year as well. And yeah, I think from that, our main message is really not about the skills gap, but we would say nonetheless mind the gap. And for us, that gap refers to the possible gap between winding down short-term crisis response measures, which have kicked in since last April across much of Europe and across other economies. So we don't want there to be a gap between those short-term crisis response measures and longer-term recovery efforts. This is a particularly concerning issue within the EU at the moment, because discussions on the longer-term recovery program are taking a while, and even after these measures, this funding is agreed, there will inevitably be a few months before it actually kicks in. Some people are saying it probably won't be felt at grassroots level until towards the end of 2021. So our fear is that if we wind down the current measures, the furloughing, short-term unemployment measures that we heard about, and others which have been very welcome, if we wind them down too quickly before these longer-term measures kick in, then we could be jeopardizing the recovery before it's even started and creating even more unemployment. So that's my number one message, is to mind that gap. Thank you, Karen.
Great, thank you, Ben. And I know one of the things that's always a challenge is this, you mentioned also lack of skilled workers And yet we have a lot of people that need different kinds of skills. And so how to make sure that we fill these different skills gaps, I think, is going to be really important, and trying to understand who has what role to play in that. Our last speaker for this first round of panel questions is Tor Hatleval. And Tor, you follow what's going on with Sweden, and in particular with the Swedish Association of local authorities and regions. And so tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and the different actions across Sweden.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for inviting me and Salar to this seminar. The situation in Sweden doesn't differ from many other of the OECD countries, and I think you pictured it quite well in the report presented earlier. And as we see a quite sharp increase in unemployment rate during this last 6 months, from just about below 6% to 9% in October. What we see now is that the labor unemployment rate has plateaued on 9%, but at the same time, we see that long-term unemployment is increasing quite sharply. So that means that people are getting unemployed, doesn't get back to the labor market. And it's primarily the service sector, and which is hit hard during the pandemic and the restrictions we have. And we also see low-skilled jobs, low-paid jobs that be more affected than high-skilled jobs, where more teleworking is more common among those. They're also being quite a short working term scheme that has been widely used, especially in the manufacturing sector and the car industry. So that has reduced the number of unemployed quite much during this period. And now the discussion is to prolong these schemes into the next year. But we also have seen is that since some couple of years after the last crisis, the financial crisis, we have seen a quite increasing polarization in the labor market, where on the one hand we see an increasing shortage of skills and in a lot of professions, and at the same time we see a quite relative high unemployment rate, around 6%, that won't go further down, even though we had a study from the Public Employment Services in 2018 showing that there was shortage in 8 out of 10 professions. And in the light of that, we as SALAR, as also an employers organization for all the regions and municipalities in Sweden, it's about 22% of the Swedish labor market. So we were the largest employers organization. We started a discussion together with the union and the government to form a program where we can see where sectors hit by structural changes, such as retail, where you can see more shift toward e-commerce from shops, where we can have a program to hire people and at the same time educate and train them so they will be employable and have the right competences for a permanent contract, especially in the care sector. And that's with the crisis and the pandemic starting this spring, we saw that the shortage of healthcare personnel were increasing sharply. And that's also where we started this program this fall, has started now, and where we try to educate, and it's to educate people from a lot of other sectors, especially service sectors. We have flight attendants that have been retrained to help at hospitals and so forth, and where we can see to shift that. And we still, this program will be at least for 1 year now, and it's funded by the government. But we see that also as not just as a crisis measure, but also a structural measure for a long term, where it can use this further on. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. And I know the example of the Scandinavian flight attendants transitioning to healthcare is one that we've also highlighted, I believe, in the report. So I think now we'll start going to questions. I'm going to group a few of them. So we have a couple questions that are specifically related to the report. So some colleagues will be on deck in a moment, some of the report authors, to answer that. Maybe a first question and then different panelists can jump in, and I'm going to combine a couple here, but one is sort of lessons you learned from the recovery of the last crisis that you think are useful this time around. And then I'm going to add to that, and what is it that this time around is just so different that you don't have some of these same lessons? So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that front, because there are quite a things that are common in different crises, and then there are some things about this one that are just really different. So Jeff, is that I see you're ready to go on that?
Sure, I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
The interesting things maybe about the geography of the United States is that we get hit by hurricanes and a lot of other weather-related issues. And so unfortunately, selected areas of our country get hit on the tourism level on a regular basis. So we have had some experience at dealing with that. If you look at our hurricanes that hit the Gulf Coast, for instance, is great for tourism, but July, August, September, they have billboards that tell hurricanes to come hit them. That's a facetious statement, of course. But we have figured out how to provide enhanced unemployment insurance to those areas when there is a sudden and severe distress. We've figured out how to provide emergency loans to businesses during those times. And we've also, we assist many of those places with planning money so they can rethink their economies at those times and maybe come back stronger. And that is what I hope will come out of this. And maybe we learned in the previous economic downturn is there are opportunities to think about what can we do as we come out of this. You should never take a crisis and not use it to its best degree and come out of it stronger than you were before.
Thanks, Jeff. And I know that we are struggling also with some other underlying changes as well in our labor markets that have been accelerated future of work. There was some items there that were raised in the presentation about the automation that will be accelerated. So we're dealing with these sort of immediate shocks and also these longer term changes. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on these lessons from last time and then something that's new this time around. Let's see, did I say Ben? Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, well, I touched upon it already, but I think what we really need to avoid this time is a premature tightening of measures to support businesses in a recession. We had a double dip recession last time because they moved too quickly with monetary tightening, and we need to be cautious about that. Of course, the public coffers are not limitless, but nonetheless, I think that's something to be really wary of. And the other question was about the differences, and I think that the most striking difference, it seems pretty obvious really, but last time the crisis was caused for our members by a slowdown of demand. This time it's not just a slowdown of demand, but it's also a slowdown of supply. They can't, the productivity has been massively constrained as well because factories haven't been able to open, shops haven't been able to open. As Tor said, in some sectors we can just continue working from our spare bedrooms or our home offices. But in many sectors, they simply are unable to do what they have been doing for decades. So it won't switch back on overnight. So that's something we need to help businesses with as well as they recover their productivity and regain their place in the market and rebuild their supply chain. So that'll take a while.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Tor, you wanted to jump in on this one?
Yeah, Sweden has had its deep financial crisis in the early 90s, and we managed the 2008-2009 crisis quite well. But during the early 90s, when we had a really deep crisis, that was at the same time as we had a technological shift with the internet. And during this crisis, the whole structure of businesses and workplace changed. And what we saw then was that young people getting unemployed managed quite well, but elderly people had a lot of scarring effects, and a lot of them didn't get back to the labor market when they got unemployed. Even though we have massive education and retraining and upskilling programs, both focused at computer and using computer itself, but also more to increase the general skills and education. For younger people, that worked quite well, but for the elderly, they didn't get back, most of the study shows. And at this time, I think we're also in a technological shift with AI and robotics, and that we have to use it. Several of these jobs that will disappear during this crisis won't come back. So we have to restruct or re-educate and upskill the labor force so they actually can be employable and take the new jobs that will be coming after the crisis. Because a lot of things will happen in business when you see in manufacturing using the new technology that will be speeding up during this downturn and aftermath. I think that the whole business's way of doing things will be quite differently after the crisis than before. So I think that's something you have to have in mind to have quite massive education programs for a lot of people getting unemployed, especially the elderly, because they are at high risk of not getting back when the old jobs are disappearing.
Thank you. Thank you, Tor. Dennis wants to jump in there.
Just very quickly, I just when added one to what other contributors have said. I think this time around we're in a better position to respond institutionally, because the last time I think a lot of reform came out of it in terms of some of our institutions, and I think that's maybe a strength that we can gain from what happened the last time, that we're in a better position to respond from our different institutions to this crisis.
Thanks, Dennis. Let's see, Raquel, I see you have your hand raised. And also, Raquel, there's a specific question for you just to clarify the unemployment rate in Barcelona. I think people misheard there, so.
I can do both. No, I was just thinking that from our point of view, the main difference between this crisis and the one we had before is been the response the administration is giving to it. Because last time we have all the austerity coming from Europe that make the government in Spain and the local service as well, and they cut some of the services and some of the aids that could have helped to stop destroying jobs. And this time, at least for us, that has been different. The administrations are trying to be there and are trying to give a more supportive answer that helps the companies, employees, self-employed entrepreneurs and the workers to keep their jobs during this period of emergency and the first period, so they can be in a better position to overcome the situation. I think that would be a main difference in our sector. And from the question, no, it's not that we have 90%, it's that we have 90,000 people unemployed, a little over that. That is around 20% of rates of unemployment. And the increase of the rate has been around 33%, more or less. If we had 90% of unemployed rates, I think I will be crying right now. It's not easy, but it will be really difficult to do something about it.
Great, thanks for that clarification, Raquel. There are a few questions that are really specific to some of the report results, and I just want to flag for Anna and Jonathan. So one of them is really specific on the, in terms of the questions of the jobs at risk. If you see here on the question, the jobs at risk, and what we can talk about the excess risk of jobs that are because of COVID, and I think we can explain a little bit the calculations there. And then Anna, if you want to pick that one up, and then Jonathan, I think there's a couple questions here about the, helping with how to engage employers in supporting, for example, those that are struggling to support youth, and especially since there's this disproportionate effect on different populations, youth, but also, as mentioned in the question, women, minorities, and the disabled. And there are some employer actions that I know have been covered in some reports that you could highlight. So maybe Anna, if you can just speak to the sort of calculations on the COVID risk and what that means today and what it could mean, as we go forward.
Great, thank you, Karen. When we talk about jobs at risk in this report, I think we can think about them in kind of two categories. There's the first chunk of jobs that are immediate risk because of COVID. So these are jobs in hospitality, tourism, arts and culture that because of containment measures and changes in individual behavior, that there's a huge drop in demand for these kinds of services, and hence the jobs are at risk. So those are the kind of immediate risks that we're seeing. But I think it's also important to think about the kind of longer term, once we're past these kind of, the public health restrictions, there's a whole other chunk of jobs at risk. And these are particularly the jobs that are at risk because of increased automation and increased digitalization. So of course, employers can't immediately automate factories or automate warehouses. So those jobs aren't going to go away today. But in the long term, I think what COVID's going to do is kind of incentivize employers to move even faster towards automation than they would have before. So these are jobs we may see disappear in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on what level of investment is needed. And similarly, as we're seeing a kind of bigger transition to e-commerce, we may see a drop in demand for local retail. So kind of jobs moving from local main streets to warehouses and delivery drivers. So really there's two chunks of jobs at risk. So we need to think about the short-term workers that are facing the risks now and what we can do to help them. And then also how do we plan in the future for workers who may lose their jobs because of this increased automation. And of course, if you're interested in the really technical details about how we calculated these, the nitty-gritty is in the report if you want to read a little bit more about that.
Great, thanks, Anna. Jonathan, there were some questions here about, some of these populations that are disproportionately affected, and then how do you help, especially engage employers in addressing that?
Great, thanks a lot, Karen. So, in terms of our understanding of the disproportionate impacts of certain groups, we're just learning, and this is data that's evolving, obviously, with the crisis. Basically, right now, we're able to get access to monthly labor force survey data, and we see, for example, on young people that youth unemployment rate of the Euro area has gone from 15% to 19%. But again, it will likely go higher because, as Lamia mentioned, one of the key government responses in Europe has been a furlong scheme, where basically national governments are paying employers to keep employees. And as these schemes slowly start to dissipate, we might see more unemployment pick up. In Canada and the US, where they're less reliant on furlong schemes, we see massive increases in youth unemployment, where it's almost doubled. Another good example here in terms of disproportionate impact is looking at the effects the crisis has had on women, where it's been really massive. A good example here is looking at numbers from Canada, where we've seen labor force participation rates of women basically go back to the levels that they were in the 1980s. So a really significant impact on women in terms of the crisis. In terms of engaging employers and what's being done, we're really seeing governments double down on investments and skills training. So the UK, for example, has just announced a lifetime skills guarantee, which basically means that any low-skilled individual now has an entitlement to get funding to go into training. Another great example, because we've been talking a lot about the impacts that this crisis is having on sectors, is in Canada, they've announced sector training funds, where they're going to block fund training to Canadian provinces, where funding will be basically targeted to tourism and hospitality and accommodation sectors that we know these are the groups of workers that really need to reskill to become more resilient in the face of the crisis. So that's giving a couple examples of what we see emerging. But indeed, as we go further along in this crisis, we're going to see even more data emerge.
Karen, if I can just jump in too to say one more thing that I think is interesting that we're starting to see from some of the emerging evidence is that low-skilled workers in urban areas are taking particularly large hits because they're often reliant on kind of spending from high-skilled workers. So these are people working in restaurants, cafes, bars, things like that. And we're really seeing a kind of drop in demand for those kinds of services. And so it's really, we're seeing kind of deepening divides and even more polarized urban labor markets now. So it'll be really interesting to continue to watch how those trends kind of continue to play out over the next couple of months.
Great, thanks. I see in the questions and answers there are a few comments. One comment in particular, and Slovenia is very strong on smart specialization and skills as part of that, and I think that's been highlighted, I think also in the discussion, the link between skills and the economic development activities, and smart specialization, particularly in Europe, is one of those tools to do that. There are some concerns about how to manage this balance between the actions taken locally and then the actions taken nationally. And one of the examples raised in the question was, especially on the green transition, how to make those links across. And so I'm just, if anyone in the panel wants to address this sort of challenge of how to make sure that we're, in a sense, coherent across different levels of government in our efforts to support this green transition. I don't know if any one of our panelists wants to take that one on. I see Ben raised his hand. Ben, and then Raquel.
Yeah, on a very basic level, within the EU, each member state is obliged to prepare what is called a resilience and recovery program to absorb the funding that they will in due course receive from the Commission to help with the recovery. And within that, there are certain percentages that they are compelled, they are obliged to spend in relation to the twin transition to digital and green economy. Which is great on paper, but indeed, as the question implies, how do you get that in practice? And for us, it's fundamental that stakeholders at grassroots level are involved in the elaboration of these national and local recovery plans. And the local factor is also important. I'm sure Raquel can speak about that more than I can, but you need to be talking to stakeholders. They need to be helping to plan those strategies, and thereafter also be involved in monitoring them and indeed even implementing them. So it's about getting the building blocks in place and making sure that all of the relevant actors are involved. Otherwise, there will be a shortfall in terms of delivery.
Thanks a lot, Raquel, please.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. For me, there is two things that have to be taken into consideration. One is that, especially now that we are having all these big problems to face, we have to be more coordinated than ever, because we have like different levels of administration that sometimes can be like anyone doing, seems like don't talk to the other. On one hand, we doesn't talk to the other hand, but now that's not possible because we have huge problem among us and problems that need the collaboration between all the administration to be solved. I think, as Ben was saying before, a co-creation of the solutions would be a good tool to do that, because sometimes from the local level we receive a program that it's absolutely perfect on paper, then it's absolutely impossible to take into place in the local level. So I think that if we find these places where we can co-create the programs and the solutions, that will be okay. I'm thinking that we have to work hand by hand, the public sector first, but also with the rest of the stakeholders as well. Because for instance, we are starting to make some, as I said before, some experiences to develop the green sector. To do that, what we are doing is that as Barcelona City, we are going to invest some money. If we have a partner in the private sector that invests also the same amount of money, that can help the sector to grow and the public money to get an effect that multiplies itself. It's not only something that you spend 1 year, but it's something that is a seed that helps another partners to grow. I think that's the kind of thing that we have to do in the future.
Thanks so much, Raquel. In terms of, I think, last couple of questions, because then I think we're going to have to head towards a closing here. There are some issues raised about the accelerated digital transition, and there's also been, changes in the delivery models. I don't know if colleagues want to address what they're doing to kind of beef up their efforts in dealing with this accelerated digital transition, whether it's in terms of how they deliver services, how they're helping firms, etc.
Yeah, Karen, it's Jeff Finkel. I put a long comment in the chat for people maybe to review. We have a problem in the States where only 78% of our population actually has access to the internet. And that is impacting progress in two different ways. One is the fact that many students or their schools are not open, and the students, in order to participate in school, are having to do so by the internet, but it's creating a group of haves and have-nots. And second, for many companies where their employees can in fact work from home, those without access through the internet are at a real disadvantage. So we have here a digital divide that has to be resolved, and it is actually causing governmental leaders at all levels and economic developers to try to plug those gaps that we have here.
Thanks, Jeff. Anyone else want to come in on that question, on this this accelerated transition, and what efforts are being taken to kind of beef up your responses? Yep, Tor.
Yeah, I just can say that one of the main obstacles or challenges is actually the level of knowledge among the workforce in digital and using computers. As studies shown by the OECD shows that the general level is quite low. If I remember the figures for Sweden correctly, I think 50% of the Swedish workforce had a none or very basic skills in ITC. And if you are in a situation where you have a transition to a more digital working life, that's one of the greatest challenges we have. And as we see it, for instance, in the care sector in a couple of municipalities around Stockholm and the city of Stockholm, they had a social funded program that tried to actually educate and train on the very basic level to actually how to make an email, how to use Word and the basic. And that's was kind of stigmatizing for a lot of people that didn't have that skills, and because they didn't want to admit that they couldn't learn. But if you had when you had a program directed at everybody in several workplaces, then it becomes more how you say it became more not so shameful not knowing how to use a computer, because that was what it was like. And then you start learning between colleagues and so forth, and that got a positive spin-off. But I think if we are in that transition, I think we have to also admit that we have a lot of people that don't have basic digital skills, and that's where we have to start.
Thank you so much, Tor. I'm just seeing we're coming to a close here, so I just wanted to flag in some of the comments. There's several talking about really the importance of supporting local entities that are really local community development organizations and other entities that, like for example, from the LEADER program in Europe, that are really doing this kind of transition work, from the bottom up. And I also just flag also the, social economy is another tool for helping to make this transition. In some cases to support the green transition, but also just in terms of creating more inclusive models for growth. So I think, today this is as Lamia Kameshui said in the beginning, this is really the launching point. And of course, the lead program at the OECD is going to be tracking closely the changes and working with different practitioners to get out information to you as quickly as possible. So maybe I'll just leave to Dennis Leamy to help close this event as chair of the lead committee, and some of the takeaways, how we're going to take this away to our OECD work in a number of fields that we've heard about today.
Thanks very much, Karen. And just look, overall, on behalf of the lead committee and indeed the Local Development Forum, I just want to thank all the speakers that took part in this webinar today for the lively discussion. I mean, there was many takeaways. Now, just to mention a few, I think the whole piece of upskilling, the importance of a just transition in that is key and critical. Also, it's important that we look at the local and the regional level in terms of our response to that, and also how that links with the national. I think that was raised through some of the questions. And of course, it's been interspersed with our focus around looking at categories of people that are affected most by this COVID crisis, young people, women, and how we respond to that. And of course, this is built upon a broader tide of labour transitions that the OECD lead has talked about for many years. So it's one layer on top of another, and how we respond to that. And through the local the lead directing committee work, we met a couple of weeks ago. We meet on a biannual basis, and representatives from over 30 countries. We actually polled our delegates to look at what the priorities for future lead work, and two issues really emerged very strongly from that. First one was how to design local approaches to help those hardest hit. So the young people, women, the low skill that we've talked about. And the second one then is to look at how we facilitate those transitions for communities and for individuals. So it was also interesting to see that 2/3 of countries that the social economy and local actions has taken on increasing importance in light of COVID. And as we seek to identify the roadmap for the future, there's also recognition through our committee and through pieces that were mentioned here, especially from the EU and other contributors, that we need to look at more disaggregated data, looking at to truly understand the economic conditions at the level of where people work, where people live, at the local level. And also, I suppose, looking at building the capacity of local capacities to collect and analyze using this new type of big and real-time data to track local conditions, so that we can respond effectively, we can respond more readily to what's emerging. And so these are very much all the issues that are very much at the core of LEAD's work. And as Lamia mentioned in our presentation, this flagship publication is just the starting point for LEAD's work on how to better track and support the local recoveries. So finally, I want to stress how important your participation in events like this to LEAD is, and to the OECD as a whole. I suppose in LEAD, we like to think we are representing in many ways the local stakeholders and participants as a reflection of the work that's going on more broadly in OECD. Because the LEAD is very much the gateway to the OECD for the voice of the local stakeholders. So the feedback that you give us is really helpful in this, to ensure that the analysis and the recommendations that emerge are relevant, that they remain relevant, that they're grounded in the local experiences. So I encourage you to reach out to the LEAD secretaries. You meet a number of them here. They're on the virtual table, to engage with them and to engage on the work that could be carried out. So finally, I just want to thank the leadership, Lamia, Karen, and of course Anna and Jonathan for all the work that's happened here, and I think it's given real fruit to a vibrant discussion. So thank you all again.
Great, thank you, Dennis. And again, on behalf of the OECD, a really huge thanks to all of those who were on our panel today and helped share their different perspectives, and then for all of those who are online, and for your questions, and also for your additional feedback. As Dennis mentioned, the Secretariat welcomes any further ideas for OECD work as part of this LEAD committee and even beyond. And we wish you all safe and healthy ending of the year, and that you're all able to manage your busy domestic priorities with experience sharing across countries, so that we can all benefit from what each party has learned. So thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.